welcome to Uncanny Catholic. My name is Ursula Bielski, and today we are looking at one of the most truly disturbing and unnerving cases in the history of the New Age, particularly the phenomenon of mediumship. It's the case of Joe Fisher and the siren call of hungry ghosts. And this is really a case that has bothered me deeply since I first started to go down into it years ago now. And it's a case that's not known to a lot of people. And really feel if more people would be familiar with these cases, famous cases, that they would not so easily accept the deceptions of mediumship and spirit communication. So I want to share with you this story today of Joe Fisher and also go through what I feel are very key takeaways from the Hungry Ghosts Odyssey that journalist Joe Fisher went on. And at the end, we'll find out just what happened to Joe Fisher at the end of this whole journey. Now, Joe Fisher never set out to fall into the world of his research. He was, at the time of the embarking into the Hungry Ghost saga, a well-known journalist. He was well-established, and he had also been studying spiritual phenomena and occult phenomena as a journalist. And he initially, when he started the Hungry Ghost research, believed that he was engaging with these wise, benevolent beings that he had met already doing research into reincarnation. So he had already been studying these sorts of occult phenomena as a journalist, and it was only as he got deeper and deeper into his experience with the so-called hungry ghosts that the facade of these beings began to crack. So he not only was seeing that these beings that he was meeting through in these mediumship sessions were fakes, but he also began to realize that all of the research that he had done into reincarnation, that he had written a book about, actually, or books about, was fake as well. So it was really like all of his understanding of the spirit world just came crashing down, as we'll see. So these spirits were not what he claimed to be. They were liars and manipulators, and perhaps something more sinister even than lying, manipulating human souls, which we'll talk about. So he had been on this quest for truth, really ardently sincere journalist that was looking for spiritual truth. But he ended up battling for his sanity. And we'll see at the end if he won that battle or not. But this whole story is a true warning against opening these doors that oftentimes cannot be closed again. So Joe Fisher's path to the paranormal and to journalism was shaped by an adventurous spirit. He was a keen intellect, had a relentless curiosity about life's great mysteries. He was born in England in 1947, and his early years were marked by a love of storytelling and exploration, and he always wanted to travel. So after completing his education, he pursued a career in journalism, and this led him across the world and ultimately down the strange and treacherous path of spirit communication. Fisher had begun his career as a reporter in the UK before moving to Canada, where he established himself as a respected reporter. And he wrote for major Canadian publications, including the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail, and the Montreal Gazette, covering a range of topics from politics to human interest stories. But despite his success in the mainstream, he was drawn to the unknown throughout his life. And this led him to write books exploring metaphysical subjects. And his first major work was The Case for Reincarnation in 1984. I remember seeing this book on the bookshelves when I was a little kid here in Chicago, first interested in the paranormal. And I remember many of the books at that time were these, not ghost hunting books, but metaphysical subjects such as reincarnation, past lives, healing and remote viewing and all of that. So, unlike many of the sensationalist works of the time, which were written by Age practitioners and occultists, this was a journalistic work. So, he was really presenting his research from the point of view of a journalist, and he never meant to get involved into it or, as we say, go down the rabbit hole and be consumed by the work. But as we've seen already, this sort of innocent looking into these things often becomes obsession. And that's a very demonic term, as we have already learned and we'll learn some more about today. But he had this skepticism and kind of detachedness of a journalist when he started looking into mediumship. He conducted meticulous research into reincarnation. When he was writing his book, he did a lot of interviews with individuals who claimed to recall past lives. And he also started to do this when he started to look at what became known as the Hungry Ghosts episode. So he went on to do another book, actually, after the case for reincarnation. In 1988, he published Life Between Life, which examined near-death experiences. We haven't talked a lot about that on this channel. You might think that I'm a big proponent of near-death experience cases where people claim that they have died and went to heaven or went to hell. I actually am not, and I think these can be very deceiving. I know a lot of Catholic priests believe in these experiences and believe that they can help people to believe in the afterlife. I think that they should really be taken with an enormous grain of salt, but that's a topic for another day. But it was during Joe Fisher's research into near-death experiences that he encountered a woman that he called Aviva. And when he got involved with Aviva and the spirit channeling that she was doing, his life started to go downhill. Aviva was this accidental medium that became the center of the Hungry Ghost saga. She had no prior history of psychic abilities before she unexpectedly began to channel the spirits of supposedly deceased humans. Her journey into mediumship then did not stem from years of occult study or even wanting to have any kind of occult powers or awareness. Like many who end up embroiled in the occult, she was seeking healing. She was very ill with leukemia and she turned to hypnosis, believing, like many of the time and still today, that through hypnosis, the body could receive suggestions for healing itself from within. So it was in this way that she allowed a friend to convince her to be put under hypnosis so that he could give her suggestions for healing, for increasing the healing blood cells and all of that sort of thing. Now, at first, these sessions were purely therapeutic. So the hypnotist, Roger, her friend, focused on relaxing her, giving her positive reinforcement, and of course, feeding her these suggestions that her body should start to heal itself. And she did start to see improvement, and her doctor started to see improvement in her body. So she continued to do these weekly sessions every Friday with Roger, hoping that her body would continue to heal itself and maybe be cured, or at least maintain this situation where she was not getting worse and would not, eventually die. But then here's what happened. As she continued these sessions, the hypnotist, Roger, uh, expressed his interest in experimenting with other methods and ideas in hypnosis. And this is something that you will often see with hypnotists and hypnotherapists. They start with this practical healing of the body, but they eventually venture in into these controversial occult territories such as past life regression and also spirit release therapy, which is something that we have talked about on Uncanny Catholic or on This Present Darkness in the past. Many of these hypnotists believe that unresolved trauma from past reincarnations, or even spirits clinging to us or being attached to us, could be the root cause of physical and mental health problems. And as you might remember, I personally walked away from hypnosis when my practitioner, who had been helping me with something else, insisted on taking me back through my past lives. And I said, like, you know what, I can't do this anymore. And you also know that I have been a victim of spirit release therapy, quote unquote therapy, which I underwent about 6 years ago after my mom passed away, thinking that I had a dark entity attached to me. I underwent this spirit release therapy and ended up worse for the wear, worse than I started with. But I can put a link to that episode about that below. But oftentimes, here's what happens. By the time the hypnotist introduces his or her desire to try out these new and occult methods and techniques, the subject has experienced healing from addiction or physical or mental healing, whatever they came to the hypnotist for, relief from, they're getting help. Their life is improving. And so they feel beholden to the hypnotist. They feel like they owe the hypnotist and they agree. Sometimes they don't want to do it, but they agree to do it because they feel they owe and they want to pay something back because they're so grateful. So it's very interesting that first there's this sort of miraculous, weird, occult healing of the person. And then that causes the person to agree to more and deeper occult activity. So where's that healing coming from? You know what I'm saying? So this was the case with Aviva. She felt she owed her life, literally, to Roger, her hypnotist, and she wanted to pay him back by letting him explore these experimental methods. And I really have to point out here that this was in the, the late 70s, 80s. This was a time where this whole metaphysical age was breaking all across the world, and totally normal people, this was not the counterculture anymore. This was stuff that everybody did. It was like back in the spiritualist movement in the 19th century when everybody was doing seances and it was normal, right? Everybody was going to like workshops to like for their past lives and for healing and to learn about their chakras and all that stuff, crystals and everything else. So this was not exactly something that was known to be harmful at the time. Even Catholics, many Catholics didn't even believe in the devil in the 1970s and 80s. And so these things were not considered like spiritually dangerous. They were just considered interesting and things that curious people did. Well, during one of these kind of advanced sessions with Roger, Aviva slipped into a deeper trance than expected, and she began to speak in this male voice that had a Scottish accent. And she was this little diminutive, petite woman, probably like 100 pounds, soaking wet. She didn't have any ability at acting or doing impersonations or anything like that, but this voice became through, and this voice identified itself as a man, human man, who had lived in Scotland, and he was her spirit guide. Someone that we all know from metaphysics now. A spirit guide is someone who's kind of assigned to you, like a guardian angel, but without God getting in the way to kind of guide you through life, right? So Aviva, who had initially thought only physical healing, suddenly found herself at the center of what would be an expanding group of people, these guides that would start to come forward to communicate with humans that started to gather around Aviva. And this Friday night session with Roger began to grow as more and more people began to come. And the first person to come, I believe, was Joe Fisher. Aviva had learned about his work and she invited him to come to one of these sessions. So he shows up wanting to meet his own spirit guide because he knew that that's what she was doing, was talking to her spirit guide. And he thought, wow, do I have a spirit guide? I want to meet my spirit guide. Spirit guide, I want one, you know? So he started to come to these Friday evenings and he was so excited about it. And he listened patiently while Aviva's spirit guide talked. And I think sometimes Roger's spirit guide talked. And he was like, where's my spirit guide? Where's my spirit guide? And then one Friday, Russell, Aviva's spirit guide, told him that Joel Fisher's spirit guide was with them. She couldn't speak yet. She couldn't come through yet herself, but she was there. It was a woman. Her name was Philippa. And they had been incarnate together hundreds of years before in this remote island in Greece. And they had this torrid love affair. And they had been together and they had done something terrible. And the local priest had chased him off of the island, never to return. And so it was this incredibly passionate thing. Well, Joe Fisher at the time was having a lot of problems with his girlfriend as it was. He didn't really seem to be in love with her. They had had some falling out. They were just kind of like oil and water. So here comes this amazing immortal love affair into his life. And of course, he's instantly entranced by the whole thing. So all of these spirits claim to be these advanced souls, former humans who had transcended physical existence, but had remained connected to the earthly realm to assist those still trapped in the cycle of reincarnation. They introduced themselves as philosophers, ancient mystics, and even figures who claimed personal connections to those in the seance group. They were on this cosmic journey together, sometimes over millennia. They had to kind of fix things that were wrong until they could all be happy together on another plane. Joe Fisher. Now, at first, Fisher's journalistic instincts kept him very skeptical of this Philippa and all of these other spirits saying that they were who they said they were. Could he really have been in love with this spirit in another lifetime? And yet Philippa seemed to know intimate details, things very specific and too detailed for Aviva to have known or to have made up and guessed at. She described places, events, and emotions that resonated deeply with Joe, convincing him that their connection was absolutely real. And as he engaged in these conversations with Philippa week after week, as she now came forward with her own demure, enchanting, broken Greek voice, he became utterly obsessed with her, a presence in his life that overshadowed everything else. And of course, as his interest in her deepened, his real world relationships suffered. His living girlfriend had no interest in competing with a dead woman that he was madly in love with and left him. As for him, for Joe, no other new relationship could compare with this ethereal love that Philippa offered him. He found himself just emotionally bound to her, craving her presence. And every morning he would go up to his office and meditate for a long time, trying to make a mental connection with her and to get messages from her. But eventually, Joe found that cracks began to form in Philippa's narrative. He began noticing inconsistencies, contradictions in her descriptions of their past lives together. And as he, as a journalist, began to look into the places and the people and the events that she talked about, even traveling overseas, he found that they just didn't pan out. And when he came home and started to question her, she started to become not only evasive, but combative. And it wasn't just Philippa. Other spirits in Aviva's circle, Joe found, had spun these elaborate and emotionally charged stories that entrapped those that listened. The spirits played on the human vulnerabilities of the people in the group, drawing them in with these tales of soulmates and karmic destiny. They thrived also on attention and devotion, and they would not put up with their soulmates having attention or affection for anyone else on the earthly plane. Fisher's suspicion deepened immensely when he saw the spirits manipulating others in the group as they were manipulating him. One of the most chilling examples was their attempt to break up the marriage of a man named Sanford Ellison, who was a fellow seance participant. The spirits told him that this is how this actually happened. He started to come and just kind of sit in the corner and observe. He was a longtime occultist, and he was also had some kind of ability to heal people. So he would come and just sit in the corner and observe. But then the spirits started to tell him that he needed to take over the hypnosis from Roger because he had this connection with Aviva. In fact, they told him eventually, they told Sanford that he had to leave his wife. He was happily married with children, had to leave his wife and family and be with Aviva because they were meant to be together. They had this karmic connection over all of these lives, and they had to be together to work out this karma. And he almost fell for it, and he just got out in time to patch up his marriage and get his family back together. But Fisher observed this happening. So Joe Fisher had to eventually come to this terrifying realization. These spirits were not benevolent, nor were they lost souls, human souls seeking connection with the living. They were something else entirely. Entities that thrived on human deception and weakness, on deception and human weakness. They spun these intricate webs of lies. They disrupted relationships, and they forged this emotional dependency that was just dark through and through. So Joe's obsession with Philippa had nearly consumed his own life, and it was only through this painstaking later investigation that he uncovered the truth about these spirits that he had been listening to and talking to week after week. They were frauds, and their stories had been designed, he realized now, to ensnare him and others in this cycle of unhealthy, otherworldly dependency. So when Fisher realized the truly deceptive nature of these entities, he walked away from the group, and he begins this sort of epic journey to discover who and what they actually were. And he started to speak to a variety of different occultists, especially psychic and mediums and channelers. And all of them describe these entities. So these are all New Agers, right? And they describe these entities in the same way as these parasitic, lower astral plane human spirits that some of them said were known in Buddhism as hungry ghosts. And Joe goes on to write a book called Hungry Ghosts. So these occultists tell Joe that these human spirits are attached to the human experience and they don't want to leave the earthly plane. They also, however, can't face their own death. So they give many accurate details about their lives. But when they get the humans, the living humans get too close, they start to lie about their deaths and other facts that would cause them to have to face their own mortality, which they can't face. Now, from a Catholic perspective, of course, this story isn't over, but I want to start to look at this a little bit. From a Catholic perspective, there are no such spirits as those known as hungry ghosts in Buddhism. Spirits fall into three categories: angels, both good angels and fallen angels or demons, the souls in purgatory, the holy souls, and the damned souls in hell. Angels, of course, are pure spirits created by God, either serving him as heavenly messengers or worshipers, or in the case of the fallen angels, having rejected him, they are now working against humanity on the earthly plane. Remember, we're told that Satan roams the earth like a roaring lion, seeking for souls to devour. The souls in purgatory are those undergoing purification before entering heaven, and most Catholics believe that at certain times, these souls may be allowed by God to visit us and in an attempt to ask us for prayers or cause us to ask to pray for them or have masses said for them. But they will never speak to us directly. And they certainly don't answer when we call them. We are never to call on them, like saying, like, are you okay? Mom, do you need prayers? No, don't do that ever. So, these purgatory souls will never like chat about their lives or carry on interdimensional relationships and love affairs with no mention of God, by the way. So this is definitely not, human souls that are in purgatory. Then there are the damned human souls, those that have rejected God entirely and are eternally separated from him. But Catholic teaching, is not, there's no real Catholic teaching on this, but some Catholic theologians and also some exorcists believe that the damned, or at least some damned souls, may roam the earth with fallen angels, trying to drag down as many souls as possible into hell. And it's interesting, as someone who is a ghost and hauntings researcher going back, almost 4 decades now, it really would explain a lot of the haunted, bars and brothels and old opium dens and murder sites that we have, right? If these damn souls are allowed by God or instructed by God to remain at places where they sinned or where these did these horrible things on earth, possibly even to continue to allow to prey on the living who are still stuck in like those kinds of addictions that keep them tied to those places. So if Joe Fisher's ghosts were hungry, it wasn't for human experience. It was for human souls. And so Joe Fisher didn't get far enough when he started to try to figure out what these things are and decided that they were what the New Agers told him. They were human spirits that were too attached to living to move on. Um he should have gone farther and found out what they really are, that these are demonic spirits, definitely demons and possibly damned human souls. Um, much worse, much worse. But this is a recurring theme in cases of spirit communication. What starts as a seemingly harmless interaction between us and these spirits on the other side soon turns into an obsession with communicating with the other side. It turns into an obsession in making, developing new and better ways of communicating with them, tools of communicating with them. And it ends up in confusion, chaos, fear, destruction of lives. You see many people in spirit communication that they're just every weekend they're gone from their family, ghost hunting, using spirit boxes, mediumship, recorders to try and communicate with spirits, and there are whole narratives that are developed at these different famous haunted locations that come out of these fakes, fraudulent, deceptive communications with these fraudulent, deceptive spirits. But we've talked about this a lot. But the goal of these spirits is not to exist among us and to have like relationships with us. It's to corrupt us, to distort our lives, to destroy our relationships, and eventually just destroy our spirituality, our faith, and our belief in God and punishment, hell, and all the other stuff. So what do we take away? And this story is still not over because the terrible ending is still yet to come. But I want to do a few takeaways from this. I guess that was the first takeaway. Or maybe that was just an observation. These weren't hungry ghosts. They were something else. Um, or hungry for the soul ghosts, perhaps. Takeaway number one, hypnosis is a gateway to the occult. Very powerful gateway. Hypnosis is the root of this whole thing. The whole hungry ghost affairs was opened up by the hypnosis. Let's talk about that for a minute. This is often sold as this harmless tool. A lot of people just I did consider it to be like a genuine like treatment for addictions, mental health problems, even physical problems, the way that Aviva was using it. And we have all these stories about how people were miraculously healed um, from all of these things by hypnosis. But if we really look at the history of hypnosis, there's a very different story because it's been a tie to the occult forever. Like I said, if most people start out going to their hypnotist or hypnotherapist for some kind of like healing from addiction or some mental health or physical health, and they find themselves put under and taken through their past lives, like down the road months or years later, because they get pulled into this by the hypnotherapist. And by the good that comes in their lives, the improvement in their health or their well-being. But, okay. So the deeper you look, the more you realize that hypnosis is always tied to the occult, spirit communication, and even experiences that mirror demonic deception. And if that's not unsettling enough, I have done a lot of work in the past few years about how hypnosis is tied to alien abduction narratives. And many people who claim that they were abducted by aliens or extraterrestrials came to that conclusion through hypnosis. So are these real memories, or are these some messages, or are they something being implanted by forces that we don't understand? Now, hypnosis as we know it today comes out of the work of a man named Franz Anton Mesmer. This is the guy where the term mesmerism comes from, and he had this idea of something called animal magnetism. He thought it was this invisible energy, and it could be manipulated in the body, and he believed that he had been given the ability to do this. Mainstream science shrugged him off, but a lot of people did not. And his ideas evolved, and they were really influential in paving the way for the huge spiritualism movement, where you had millions of people all over the world conducting nightly seances in their living rooms, and practicing spiritualism and spirit communication as a religion. Sometimes Christianity right alongside it, oftentimes. Andrew Jackson Davis was one of the biggest practitioners of animal magnetism, and he took it further. They knew him as they called him the Poughkeepsie Seer. And under hypnosis, he started receiving messages from the spirit world. And this would set the stage for what would become a massive movement, the big, huge movement of spiritualism. Edgar Cayce, who I'm sure you've heard about, often called the sleeping prophet, used self-hypnosis to enter trance states where he claimed to receive hidden knowledge from other realms. So back in the 19th and early 20th centuries, mediums were doing something very eerily similar to modern hypnotherapy. They would go into these deep trances, perform automatic writing, get messages from the spirits, channel spirits, and even allow themselves to be fully possessed. And it really starts to raise some disturbing questions, especially when you see of all of the, pretty young blonde girls practicing hypnosis, at the group hypnosis clinic in Bucktown here in Chicago. I'm just throwing something out there. This is just a totally mainstream happy health thing today, right? And you never think of it as a spooky, weird spirit thing. But it is. So I want to talk for just a moment about something that, again, I've done a lot of work on the last few years, and that's the connection of hypnosis with alien abduction narratives. One of the most and first and most famous alien abduction stories is the Betty and Barney Hill case. In 1961, this couple saw a UFO on their way home, I think they were coming home from Niagara Falls or something, to their home in New England. And later, under hypnosis, they remembered being taken aboard a spaceship and examined by strange beings. This set off a wave of similar claims that just spiraled and spiraled ever since. But here's the kicker. Most of these stories come out only under hypnosis. And there have been whole books about this. Bud Hopkins, his book Missing Time, Whitley Strieber's Communion, other books, John Mack, Harvard University, David Jacobs, who I interviewed for my book. These people all became very adept at putting people under hypnosis to draw out of them their so-called memories of their alien abduction experiences. And it's very interesting because the stories and the experiences are all so similar. But is that because these people were all having similar experiences with extraterrestrials? Or is it because the hypnosis opened up a channel in each of their minds for these dark forces, demonic entities, to feed them the same narrative and make it appear as though they had the same experience? And this would be very helpful for a nefarious purpose. If I was the devil and I wanted to convince humanity that there was a large-scale communication going on between the spirit world or the world of extraterrestrials, interdimensional beings, and mankind, this would be a really great way to do that. A very simple way to do that as well, because all you have to do is volunteer to clear your mind and open it up for whatever wants to come through, which is exactly what you do when you go under hypnosis. Catholic exorcists like Malachi Martin, the late Jesuit exorcist, warn against hypnosis. They say that it weakens the will and it makes people vulnerable to external control. And of course, that's control not only from the hypnotist, but from these invisible entities. Think about it. In these alien abduction narratives, the extraterrestrials paralyze their victims, control their thoughts, communicate telepathically. If you compare these to the classic accounts of demonic oppression, like sleep paralysis, mind control, deception, these are all aspects of those. They're identical, identical. And here's something even weirder. Many people who claim alien encounters also report paranormal activity in their homes, poltergeist disturbances, or a history of dabbling in the occult, particularly hypnosis. Ouija boards, too. I write all about this in The Devil in Dreamland, so be sure to check out that book. If you want to buy it, I'll put that link below in the description. But I'm also serializing it right now for free week by week, chapter a week on my Substack, and I'll have that below as well. So hypnosis is not just a relaxation tool. It's certainly not a tool for healing. It is a state of surrender. And throughout history, we've seen that these altered states of consciousness have been used to connect with the spirit world. Now, takeaway two from the Joe Fisher Odyssey, the spirits were not what they seemed. Joe Fisher realized that Philippa was a fraud. And more disturbingly, that all of the spirits channeled through Aviva were frauds. This wasn't just, a sudden epiphany, but there was this slow, agonizing, horrifying realization that he discovered over many months, possibly years. I can't remember how long this went on, of being involved in this whole thing. So at first he was completely enthralled by Philippa, believing her to be this spirit who shared a profound love with him. She seemed to know him intimately, spoke to him with tenderness, and just constantly reinforced this idea that they were soulmates, destined to be together across hundreds of incarnations. But his first doubts arose when he noticed contradictions in the information the spirits were giving. And we see this all throughout occult experiences with mediumship and channeling, automatic writing, ghost hunting, ghost boxes, and all that stuff. So he tried to rationalize it away because he wanted to believe that it was true, but the inconsistencies became too numerous to ignore. And when he tried to test the spirits, as we're taught to do as Christians, he went and researched the past lives, and he found that he could not confirm them. Now, just a little caveat here. Just because you can confirm them, the details of the spirit's so-called human life, does not mean that these are actually human beings, or that they are, uh, the here for your good. I wrote about and I've talked about on here Father Nathan Castle, who is a Catholic priest who has a ministry to help what he calls stuck souls cross over from this plane because they're here because they got something they like can't get over or get past, which is completely un-Catholic and totally not true. And it's just boggles my mind that many Catholics, including Jimmy Akin, um, one of the most famous and influential Catholic apologists today, support his work. It's insanity. But he said he knew that this spirit that needed help from him crossing over was real because he researched the information he gave him and found that there was a real person, who had really lived and died the way that he said he died. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You actually believe that? The devil knows everything. He's got agents in every tiny little inch of the world. He has for eternity. He knows every single thing that we do. If I whisper something under my cover, in bed at night, a little prayer, he hears it. If um, he knows all the bad things that you do, except the things you're thinking. He knows all the little things you steal, the pens that you steal at work, and he knows, all these things. And exorcists warn us that, if we do not confess these things, that the devil has control over them and he can use them against us. And they see this in exorcisms when when either the exorcist or an exorcism assistant, the demon will mock the people that have these unconfessed sins and say like, oh, you pretend to be so holy, but I know that you're having an affair with so and so, or I know that you watch porn, after your wife goes to bed at night or whatever. So we cannot trust what these things say because the devil knows everything. He sees everything, knows everything, and uses it against us at every opportunity. But Fisher, he saw very clearly that he didn't even have to test like things that were truths. He saw that there were a lot of holes in Philippa's story. And when he challenged her on it, she got very angry, manipulated him, cried, screamed, the whole bit, trying to manipulate him more, control him. So takeaway 3, the pattern across paranormal cases is the spirit's obsession with human love lives. This is fascinating. What happened to Fisher and the people targeted in this case mirrors some of the most disturbing cases I have personally researched in my 35 years as a ghost hauntings researcher and historian of the supernatural. Across many different paranormal experiences, these entities display an intense interest in the romantic and sexual lives of human experiencers. The infamous Bell Witch case that played out in early 19th century Tennessee, where this disembodied voice interacted with family for years. This entity known as the Bell Witch tormented Betsy Bell, one of the children, until she broke off her engagement to a neighbor's son. This entity did not want her with this guy for some reason. And the spirits said, I control you and you will not marry the man that you love. And she finally broke it off with him. In the 1980s, a case that we talked about on here, the Moffat family haunting, an entity the family called Mr. Entity, who identified itself as one of the princes of hell, tormented the family in 3 different houses, left its demonic sigil marked all over the house, scratched, burned, spray painted into all of the surfaces of the house, and communicated with the family by writing in soap on the bathroom mirror. That entity at one point tried to coerce Bill Moffat into murdering his wife. The spirit even apparently manifested an ancient sword, presenting it as the tool that Bill should use to commit the act. In the case of Bill Konkolowski, well-known UFO experiencer, he actually spoke at one of the paranormal conferences that I used to put on here in Chicago. Such a nice man. Very sincere man. I believe that he has had these experiences, but they're not UFO experiences. But his abductions, he's written about his abduction experiences, and he has this relationship. And I've written about this too, in Devil in Dreamland. A lot of these UFO experiences identically mirror familiarization of spirits. When a demonic spirit will familiarize a human victim, and there is this close bond that's formed where they're like inseparable. So yeah, I wrote about that in the book, but this is the case in a lot of these UFO experiences. Bill's abductions were frequently linked with the interference of non-human entities in his personal relationships and romantic relationships. This is part of a phenomenon that's so widespread in UFO abduction that one researcher, Eve Lorgan, she's a new ager. I wouldn't recommend her work, but it's interesting. She coined a term, the alien love bite, to describe the way that entities, whether extraterrestrial or something else, seem obsessed with manipulating human romantic and sexual relationships. Very weird. So when we see this pattern emerge across different paranormal encounters, it really raises this undeniable red flag, one that any trained demonologist would immediately recognize. Fisher's experience with these spirits, particularly Philippa, and the others who attempted to control relationships, aligns with the traditional concept of succubi and incubi. These are malevolent entities in Christian demonology that seek to seduce, deceive, and entrap humans through emotional, physical, and sexual manipulation. So they will use sexual and romantic enticement to weaken their victims and eventually control them. And they're said to feed off human energy, especially lust, obsession, and despair as well. We see this a lot after grief. Medieval folklore often described physical encounters with these incubi and succubi, but the goal has always been spiritual corruption. I think it's almost easier for them today, where there's such an obsession with new age stuff that's like transcendental, that I think we always talk about that our age is not as spiritual. I don't know. I would beg to differ. And I would beg to for you to consider that there's such an acceptance of so much new agey spiritual stuff today that I think it's a lot easier, especially because there's not the grounding in the belief in God and religion and the sacraments to protect somebody from becoming a victim of one of these things. Takeaway 4. The occult will take everything from you. Everything. In the final years of his life, Joe Fisher could never quite escape what had happened to him. He had walked away from the sessions with Aviva. He had given up Philippa and the other guys. He wrote his book, Hungry Ghosts. Years later, it was re-released with a different title, The Siren Call of Hungry Ghosts. After he had time to really, I think, reflect on everything that had happened and how serious and deliberate it was. His research into spirit communication had not been a mere academic exercise, as it often turns out not to be. I am living proof of that, my friends. This is my life's work now, is to warn you that you cannot research spirit communication on this level as a participant without losing your soul or almost losing your soul. This research had consumed him, pulled him into this obsession that destroyed his real world relationships and left him emotionally and spiritually decimated. Even after he severed ties with this group and walked away from all of this, he was never truly free. And he described feeling watched and followed as if something unseen still had its hooks in him. He told his editor that the ghosts were still after him. He had devoted his life to seeking after the truth. But in the end, it was as if the truth had sought him out and decided to destroy him. In 2001, Joe Fisher was found dead at the base of a limestone cliff in Ontario, Canada. His death was ruled a suicide, but those who knew him best could not shake the feeling that something darker had been at work. He had been suffering from a deep depression, but his paranoia had also grown. In the months leading up to his death, he confided in friends that something he felt was after him. He would wake up in the night with the sense that he was not alone. Shadows moved in the corners of his vision. There seemed to be this presence, just this oppressive presence that was always lingering near him, and he could not prove it, but he was sure of it. Some of his friends say he jumped. His life was in shambles. Others suggest that he was pushed. And there seemed to have been something with he had grabbed onto a branch or something like that. There were like some kind of sign of a struggle that seemed to suggest there might have been something else, that it was not something willing on his part. Reminded me of the death of the exorcist Malachi Martin, who fell down a flight of stairs, and people who were close to him believed that it was a case that he was working on, an exorcism that was going on for a long time, exorcism of a little girl, and some believe that the demon killed him so that he would not be able to finish the exorcism. It's very interesting. There is no such thing, my friends, as a benevolent or beneficial relationship with a spirit, except, of course, our guardian angel, and, of course, the Holy Spirits. There are no lost souls longing for human companionship. There's no karmic stories that have to be resolved before people can go to paradise. There are no spirit guides except for our guardian angels, waiting to offer wisdom if only we can open the channels of our minds through hypnosis and other occult activity. Poor Joe Fisher spent years searching for spiritual truth, but what he never did was open up the Bible to find it. In his final moments, he finally understood the one thing that had been true all along, that he had been dealing with something that had never, ever been human. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode of Uncanny Catholic, and I hope that you put down in the comments what you think of the story of Joe Fisher and the siren call of hungry ghosts. I hope that you look at the links, because I've got this whole story written on my Substack, and I've also got the link for the Ghost Lores podcast. That's a dramatic telling of the story if you like kind of spooky stories, haunted history stories to fall asleep to at night, or while you're working out or cooking or what have you. You can check that out as well. I hope you subscribe to this channel, like the video, and follow me here and everywhere as we explore the world of the supernatural through a Catholic lens. Thanks so much for being here, and I hope to see you next time. Until then, remember to pray for ghosts. I'm Ursula Bielski. See you next time.